A quiet suburb, a promising daughter, and a mother who thought she'd finally found peace. But everything shatters the night 16-year-old Alice Goodman is stopped by police on her walk home and doesn't make it back. What begins as a routine inquiry spirals into brutal violence, landing Imani in a coma and plunging her mother, Alice, into a nightmare she never saw coming. As silence closes in and officials close ranks, one woman must decide whether to fight a system built to bury the truth or let it swallow her family whole. Alice Goodman didn't flinch anymore when her phone buzzed in the middle of the night. Not after all those years in trauma. It was just part of the rhythm now. Late-night calls, codes over the intercom, life or death resting on a few quick decisions. But none of that prepared her for the quiet that came with Brookridge Hills. That stillness was foreign. No sirens, no helicopters hovering above cracked pavement, no neighbors screaming down the hallway. It felt like a new language, and Alice was trying to learn it for her daughter's sake. Imani was the reason they came. 16, bright-eyed and already testing out early college classes. Her smile could break you wide open. That summer, Alice packed everything they owned into a rented U-Haul and drove them out of Pinefield, out of the chaos, the trauma, the stretch of broken trust that had left her watching the clock every time Imani was late getting home. Brookridge Hills promised something else: order, safety, a reset. The house wasn't big, but it was clean. Beige siding, 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. The neighbors smiled with their mouths, but not with their eyes. The grocery stores played classical music, and the police cruisers rolled slowly like sharks beneath calm water. Imani didn't notice any of that. She made friends fast, joined the yearbook committee, made captain of the girls' basketball team by the 3rd week. She even brought home flyers for volunteer work at the animal shelter. Alice watched her bloom in the way she never had back in Pinefield. It almost made the second mortgage feel worth it. Still, something always felt slightly off. Alice noticed how the clerk at the pharmacy triple-checked her ID, how the barista at the cafe handed her change with an awkward smile and averted eyes. Once, she overheard 2 women at the farmer's market whispering as Imani walked past in her school hoodie. "Must be part of that diversity grant," one said. Alice didn't tell Imani. She wouldn't do that. Let her have her joy a little longer. Alice worked nights at St. Eileen's, a mid-size hospital on the east side of town. It wasn't as fast-paced as Pinefield General, but it had its moments. She kept to herself mostly, did her job, did it well, and went home. Her manager, a wiry man named Keith, complimented her often enough. But something in his tone always felt like performance, like he wanted a cookie for being decent. The only person she clicked with was Darlene, a tech in the ER, who'd once slipped her a chocolate bar and whispered, "I've been the only one for years, before you came." One Thursday night, just 3 months into the move, Alice came home from her shift and found the house dark. Not unusual. Imani always kept the lights off when she was in her room watching videos, but this time there was no blue glow under the door. Her phone was still on the charger. Alice checked the kitchen, untouched. Her backpack was gone, and the chair she usually draped her jacket on was empty. Alice didn't panic right away. Imani had probably stayed late at the library again. Midterms were coming up, but by 9:30 that calm began to splinter. She called. No answer. Texted. Nothing. She tried to steady her breathing as she grabbed her keys and headed out, retracing the familiar route Imani took home. At 10:12 p.m. her phone rang. Unknown number. She picked up before the second ring. A flat voice came through. Male, no emotion. "This is Officer Joel Mackey with the Brookridge Hills Police Department. Your daughter is at Memorial Central. You should come." He didn't explain what happened. Didn't ask if she was okay. Just gave the address and hung up. The ER lights felt different that night. Harsher. Everything hummed like it was vibrating under her skin. A nurse guided her to Trauma Bay 3, where 2 officers stood outside the curtain. Alice's badge swung from her lanyard. The nurse recognized her. "I'm sorry," she said, voice hushed. She's stable, but the words got lost behind tight lips. Alice pushed past them and froze. Imani didn't look like Imani. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, one eye sealed shut, dried blood crusted around her nose, and her braids were tangled and torn at the roots. Tubes ran into her arm. A neck brace wrapped her throat. For a long moment, Alice couldn't move. Her knees wobbled. Her fingers twitched. Her brain tried to click into nurse mode to assess injuries clinically, but the mother in her screamed louder. She stepped out, slow and trembling, back into the hall. The two officers, white, clean-shaven, smug, nodded like this was normal. "What happened to my daughter?" she asked, voice brittle. "She matched a suspect description," said the taller one, later identified as Brent Halpern. "She resisted. We followed protocol." "Resisted? She's 16. "Protocol," he repeated, as if it were scripture. Mackie avoided her eyes. Alice clenched her jaw. "I want the body cam footage." "There was a malfunction," Halpern said, "too fast." She stared at him. "Both of you?" "Ma'am," he said, emphasizing the word like a warning, "we did what we had to. We've already filed the report." That night, Alice didn't sleep. She sat beside Imani's bed, gripping her daughter's hand and whispering her name over and over again. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply sat there, watching the monitor beep and let the silence build inside her like a storm. Word spread quickly at the hospital. Darlene was the only one to say anything. "You gonna let this slide?" she asked, her voice low and tight. "They want you quiet. You gonna be quiet?" Alice didn't answer. On her second day at the hospital, a woman approached her outside the room, mid-60s, wearing a cardigan and a look of practiced concern. "I'm Margaret Monroe," she said. "I live on Langley Drive. I think I saw what happened." Alice looked up, weary. "What do you mean?" Margaret leaned in. "I didn't sleep that night. Heard shouting. I came outside. I saw two officers with a girl on the ground. I started recording." The air stopped moving. "You have it?" Alice asked, nearly breathless. Margaret nodded slowly. "It's not much. I didn't catch the beginning, but it's enough to know something was wrong." Alice stared at her, unsure if she wanted to cry or scream. "I haven't shown anyone," Margaret added. "Didn't know what to do. But I couldn't sleep. I saw her face." A long silence passed between them. Alice finally said, "I want it." Margaret nodded. "Give me till morning. I'll bring it." That night, Alice sat beside her daughter again, but this time she wasn't whispering. She was planning. She didn't know yet how deep the silence in Brookridge Hills ran. She didn't know how many locked doors, erased footage, or quiet threats stood between her and justice. But she did know one thing. Imani Goodman's phone vibrated once in the front pocket of her hoodie. She didn't hear it over the quiet thud of music in her earbuds, but she felt it, a small rhythmic buzz against her ribs. She slipped it out, glanced at the screen, and smiled. "Everything okay? You headed home?" Her mother. Always checking, always careful. Imani typed a quick reply. "Yeah, Mom, leaving now. Be home soon." The air was cool, but not cold. Fall had crept in gently that year, laying a soft blanket of golden leaves over the sidewalks of Brookridge Hills. Imani tugged her sleeves down over her hands and walked a little faster. She didn't like being out too late, especially not in this neighborhood. Not because it was dangerous. Brookridge had its reputation for being safe, carved into every brick and trimmed hedge, but because it never quite felt like it belonged to her. She felt watched here, even when the streets were empty. She turned off Oakview Drive and onto Langley, passing a line of large houses with sleepy windows. Her backpack was heavy. AP History and Chemistry tonight. But her steps were light. She had aced her quiz, helped a classmate with her essay, and found a flyer for a youth leadership conference her counselor said she'd be perfect for. Imani was used to proving herself. In class, on the court, even at church, always careful, always prepared. It was what her mom taught her, and she took it seriously. She didn't notice the first patrol car at first. It crept around the corner behind her, headlights low, engines soft. The second one came from the other direction, parking just ahead near the curb. It wasn't until the first one pulled up beside her that she stopped. A voice called out, "Hold up." She pulled out her earbuds and looked up. A tall white officer stepped out of the cruiser. Late 30s, buzz cut, hand resting on his belt near his holster. "Need to see some ID." Imani blinked. "Is something wrong?" "Just need to see some ID," he repeated, voice flat. Another officer, younger and thinner, exited the second car and circled around behind her. Imani's fingers gripped the strap of her backpack. "I'm only 16, she said, her voice polite, steady. "I don't have a license, but I've got my school ID." She reached for the zipper slowly. "Keep your hands where we can see them," the first officer barked, taking a quick step forward. She froze. I was just getting my ID like you asked." The second officer, now behind her, said something she couldn't quite hear. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. "Put your hands on the hood," the first officer ordered. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I live right there, on Chestnut Lane. My mom's at the hospital. She's a nurse." "Hands on the hood." Imani turned, still gripping her backpack strap. "Can I call her? She'll tell you who I am." "She's reaching," the first officer shouted, and everything unraveled. A blur of movement, a heavy body slamming into hers, her face smashed against cold metal. The backpack dropped, her phone spilling across the pavement. A sharp crack as it hit the concrete. Imani gasped, but the breath was knocked out of her. A hand gripped the back of her head. Her cheek scraped against the car as she was shoved down again, harder this time. Something burst in her nose. She could taste the blood in her throat. Stop resisting. She wasn't moving. Couldn't. Her limbs were jelly, her voice barely a whisper. "Please. Please. I didn't do anything." A baton came down hard into her side. Another strike landed against her back. She cried out once, a weak, garbled sound, then went silent. From across the street, a porch light flicked on. Margaret Monroe had been watering her plants when she heard the yelling. She stepped onto the porch, phone in hand, squinting across the street. "Hey," she called. "What's going on over there?" The officers didn't answer. The younger one looked up briefly, then back down. The older one kept swinging. "He's just a kid," Margaret shouted, stepping onto the grass. "Back inside, ma'am," the younger officer snapped, lifting his baton toward her. "Police business." "Is not even moving. What are you doing to her?" Margaret held up her phone, the red light blinking as it recorded. Her hands trembled. The taller officer looked over at her, face flushed, nostrils flaring. He didn't say another word, but he stopped. Imani lay motionless on the pavement, blood soaked through the sleeve of her hoodie. Her backpack had been tossed into the street. The radios crackled. "This one doesn't match," the younger officer said into his mic. "Suspect was male, 6 foot." There was a long silence. "She's female, probably 5'5". Another silence. The older officer muttered, "She had something in her hand." "It was a phone," the younger one whispered. They stood there, breathing hard, eyes darting. Then, slowly, they began to move. They cuffed her, even though she didn't stir. Lifted her limp body off the ground. The older officer opened the back of the cruiser, while the younger one tried to wipe his face clean of panic. Margaret stood in the dark, still recording, until the red and blue lights disappeared around the corner. 20 minutes later, Alice arrived at Memorial Central, rushing through sliding doors with her ID badge swinging around her neck. The nurse at the front desk didn't meet her eyes. A young man from security was waiting near the elevator. "Stacy, there was no resistance," he mumbled. Alice said nothing. When she finally saw her daughter, tubes in her arms, lips split, face unrecognizable, her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. She clutched the edge of the gurney and steadied herself. Her daughter, the one she'd moved across counties for, the one she protected like oxygen, the one who always texted when she was 10 minutes late, was now unconscious under sterile lights in a city that swore it was safe. Alice sat there until the nurse returned and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "There's someone here to see you," she said quietly. A woman stood in the hallway, gripping a phone in her palm. "Margaret." "I live on Langley," she said. "I saw what they did. I recorded some of it. I didn't catch the beginning, but—" Alice looked up, her eyes rimmed with fury and something deeper. "Resolve." "I want it," she said. Margaret handed her the phone without a word, no hesitation. Alice played it back once, face stone still, no tears, no questions. Only silence. And then she stood. Not slowly, not shakily. She stood like someone who had seen this before. But this time she wasn't going to wait for someone else to make it right. Alice hadn't left the hospital in over 30 hours. The chair beside Imani's bed had formed to her body. Her coat, still stained with coffee from yesterday's shift, was crumpled in the corner. She didn't care. She barely blinked. The slow, mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor had become a cruel kind of lullaby. Every time the machine beeped, it reminded her Imani was still here, and that Alice couldn't leave until something changed. The doctors came and went with tight mouths and cautious voices. One mentioned a mild skull fracture, another referenced cerebral edema. They tiptoed around words like coma and recovery window, thinking their professionalism masked their fear. Alice saw through them. She'd worked with enough of them to know what they weren't saying. Outside the ICU room, the police officers were gone. No apology, no statement, no follow-up. Just gone, like the violence had never happened. The front desk still had the log from the night before, but the names were redacted. Alice asked for the incident report. They claimed there wasn't one yet. She called the Brookridge Hills Police Department herself. After a long hold, a woman told her that any further questions should be routed through the Public Affairs Office. "Is Officer Halpern working today?" she asked. "I am not authorized to release that information," the voice replied. Alice hung up without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, Darlene pushed open the door to Imani's room with 2 coffees and a donut in a paper bag. "You look like hell," she said, placing the cup beside her. Alice didn't look up. "Thanks." Darlene sat. "You called the department?" "They're pretending it didn't happen." "Of course they are," Darlene muttered. "That's what they do. If there's no paper trail, there's no problem." Alice finally turned to look at her. "I have a video." Darlene's eyebrows rose. "You serious?" "A neighbor recorded it." "Margaret Monroe. She gave me the file." "Well, damn." Darlene took a slow sip of coffee. "You need to talk to someone higher up. Internal. Media. Hell. Go to the mayor if you have to." Alice exhaled. "They'll try to bury it." "Cleanly will," Darlene agreed. "But now you've got proof. That makes you dangerous." Dangerous. Alice chewed on that word. She'd spent most of her life trying not to be that. In Pinefield, she'd played by the rules. Went to college, worked double shifts, paid her taxes, kept her daughter close, her opinions quieter, all to avoid the label that black women carried when they spoke too loudly or demanded too much. But now, looking at her daughter lying motionless in a hospital bed, Alice no longer cared what they called her. She didn't go to the media. Not yet. She started with a reporter she remembered from her days in Pinefield, Tori Givens. They weren't friends, not exactly, but Tori had interviewed her once for a hospital profile and left a good impression. Her articles cut through the noise. She told hard stories. Alice sent a single message. My daughter was beaten by Brookridge Hills PD. I have the footage. She's in a coma. Call me. The reply came 30 minutes later. I'm on the next train. Don't say a word to anyone else. While she waited, Alice stared out the window of the ICU room. The view overlooked the hospital's west courtyard, a small rectangle of grass and concrete benches. A young couple sat near the far edge, laughing over a shared drink. A security guard leaned against the wall with a sandwich in his hand. Life went on, uninterrupted. The nurse came in for rounds. Alice asked again if they had a timeline for Imani's recovery. We're monitoring her closely, the nurse said, but it's wait and see. I don't do well with waiting. The nurse offered a sympathetic smile and left. An hour later, Tori arrived. She wore dark jeans and a leather jacket, and her hair was pulled back into a tight puff. She walked into the room like she had been invited to a war briefing, not a bedside vigil. I need to see it, she said. Alice handed her the flash drive Margaret had given her. Tori plugged it into her laptop and watched in silence. The red glow from the screen cast hard shadows across her face. When the video ended, she looked up slowly. Jesus. Alice folded her arms. What now? I need copies. I need to verify location markers. I'll cross-section timestamp metadata with police dispatch logs. I'll work fast, but you need to be ready. For what? Tori leaned forward. Once this goes out, it's not just about Imani. They'll try to make it about you, your background, your parenting, your finances. They'll twist this until people forget what the video shows. I don't care what they do to me, Alice said. They're not touching her. Tori nodded. Good. Because when this breaks, you're going to be on your own. At first. Later that evening, Alice returned to the ICU. Imani still hadn't stirred. Her hand remained limp in Alice's palm. The machines kept humming, steady but indifferent. At least, Alice whispered, they won't get away with this. A soft knock on the door broke the quiet. It wasn't the nurse. A tall black woman in a plain navy suit stepped inside. Alice Goodman. I'm Detective Rachel Barnes, Internal Affairs. Alice rose, unsure. You're with Brookridge. Technically, yes, but not with those two. I saw the report, and when your name showed up, I started digging, he said. There was no report. Rachel smirked. That's what they always say. But there's always a report, even if it's a fake one. Alice looked at her closely. You're the first one from the department to show your face. That's because I still have a conscience, Rachel said, and because I have a daughter, too. Alice's shoulders softened just slightly. Rachel continued. I need everything you have, names, times, the footage. I'll run it quietly. You'll get fired. I might, Rachel admitted, but if I don't do this, what's the point of wearing the badge? Alice took a slow breath. You're sure you can help? Rachel's voice was firm. If you give me a way in, I won't stop until it cracks. Alice handed her the copy of the footage. Rachel took it with both hands like it was sacred. They didn't shake hands. Didn't smile. There wasn't time for that. After Rachel left, Alice looked down at her daughter again. The bruises had started to fade slightly, but the swelling around her eyes still hadn't gone down. She pressed her forehead gently against Imani's hand. They think you're just a file number now, she whispered. They think you're going to stay quiet, that I will. Her voice didn't tremble. By Monday morning, the air in Brookridge Hills felt heavier, like something simmering just beneath the surface. Alice stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the same cup of coffee she had poured 2 hours ago. She hadn't slept, hadn't showered, had barely blinked. A copy of the video now sat on 3 separate flash drives, one in her purse, one in the freezer beneath the bag of frozen peas, and one taped under the bathroom sink. She wasn't taking chances. At 7:16 a.m., The phone rang. "This is Alice," she answered. "This is Principal Evers," came the voice on the other end, tight and rehearsed. "I'm calling to let you know that we're temporarily suspending Imani's participation in student leadership and extracurriculars, pending further review of the incident." Alice blinked. "She's in a coma." "Yes, I'm aware," he replied, voice thinning. "But we've received inquiries from concerned parents, and the district has advised we pause any involvement until full details emerge." "You're punishing a girl who hasn't opened her eyes in 4 days." "We're not punishing her, Mrs. Goodman. We're simply proceeding with caution." Alice hung up. That afternoon, she stopped by the hospital to sit with Imani. Nurses still rotated in and out, soft and professional, but now they were less talkative, more mechanical. One smiled too hard, another avoided eye contact entirely. The warmth had drained from the floor like someone had turned off the heat. Rachel Barnes had gone quiet since their last meeting. Alice assumed she was working under the radar, but the silence gnawed at her. Everything Eddie said ate at her up. He remembered her work. At 4:03 p.m., her phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "Check local press, page 6. Alice grabbed a paper at the corner store and flipped to the page. There, nestled between a profile of a local bakery and a blurb about a town council vote, was the headline, "Mother of injured teen has history of workplace complaints." The article dug up a complaint from years ago in Pinefield, filed by a former nurse who accused Alice of creating a hostile environment after reporting unsafe patient care. The hospital had quietly dismissed it, but now it was back, sanitized and served with a headline that cast doubt without evidence. She read the last line twice. "Ms. Goodman has yet to publicly comment on her daughter's condition or her own actions leading up to the incident." As if she had done something wrong. The phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Tori. "They're coming hard. You ready?" Alice didn't respond. She just closed the paper, folded it carefully, and slid it into her purse next to the flash drive. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She drove to St. Ilium's for her night shift like nothing had happened. But the energy inside the hospital had changed. Keith, her manager, greeted her with a brittle smile. "Can I see you in my office for a moment?" She followed without a word. Behind the closed door, Keith folded his hands and offered a sympathetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We've been reviewing schedules and staffing needs and, well, in light of recent events, we think it's best if you take a temporary leave of absence." "For how long?" she asked. "Indefinite," he said. "I've done nothing wrong." Keith leaned back in his chair. "That may be true, but the optics—" "The optics," Alice snapped, the word tasting like bile. "Is it bad optics that your trauma nurse is black, or that her daughter got beaten by 2 of your town's officers?" Keith looked genuinely flustered. "Alice, this isn't personal. It's procedural." "No," she said, standing. "It's political. And you just picked a side." She walked out. By the time she got home that night, Margaret Monroe was waiting on the porch with a Tupperware of baked mac and cheese and worry all over her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I saw the article. I should have come sooner." Alice took the container, but didn't move to open it. "They're trying to isolate me, make me the story instead of what happened to her." Margaret nodded. "That's what they do. The louder you get, the more they try to bury you." "I need help," Alice admitted. "But no one wants to stick their neck out." Margaret looked her square in the eyes. "Then I will." Alice was silent. "I'll speak," Margaret continued. "I'll go on record. I'll say what I saw. I'll give them my video, too." "You sure?" Alice asked. "I'm old," Margaret said. "They can't fire me from retirement, and I don't have any more kids for them to harass. But I've got eyes. And what I saw was a child being brutalized for walking home." Alice nodded slowly. Thank you. 2 days later, Tory published the story. Headline: Footage reveals brutal police beating of unarmed teen in Brookridge Hills. Margaret's name was in the byline. So was a still image from the video, blurred but unmistakable. The story included the video's timestamp, GPS data, and expert verification. It also included quotes from Rachel Barnes, confirming that Internal Affairs had launched a preliminary inquiry. The article exploded online. It spread through Twitter and Facebook like fire in dry grass. Hashtags emerged: Justice for Imani, Walked While Black, Brookridge Cover-Up. By nightfall, news vans began parking outside the hospital. Protesters gathered near City Hall. Students from Imani's school marched with signs. The quiet town's silence cracked. And then came the backlash. Alice received an email with no subject and 2 words: stay quiet. A day later, her car's windshield was smashed in the hospital parking lot. The police took a report, but no one followed up. Rachel called again, her voice lower this time, more guarded. They're trying to shut it down, she said. Internals being pressured to delay. They're saying the video was doctored. It wasn't. Alice replied, I know. But they're desperate. Then we keep going, Alice said. We keep pushing. I can't protect you much longer, Rachel admitted. They're watching me now, too. Then they're scared, Alice said. She hung up and turned back to the ICU room, where Imani still lay, unmoving. That night, the lights flickered from the hallway, someone adjusting the brightness again. Nurses shuffled by. Monitors beeped in their regular rhythm. Alice leaned close to Imani's ear. You hear all that noise, baby? That's for you. That's your name on their signs. That's your story out there now, not theirs. She held her daughter's hand and whispered, They started this, but I'm going to finish it. The morning the video went public, Brookridge Hills woke up different. The town that prided itself on its quiet charm and manicured sameness now buzzed with the electricity of unease. Parents whispered at bus stops. Teachers checked their phones between classes, and shopkeepers glanced up nervously every time someone walked through the door. On Langley Drive, where it all happened, the sidewalks were no longer invisible. Now they were part of something much louder, a battle being fought in headlines and hashtags, in picket signs and press releases. Alice watched it unfold from the hospital waiting room, her phone screen filled with reposts, comments, and news alerts. Her inbox overflowed. Reporters, activists, strangers from other cities. Everyone wanted her voice, her story, her statement. But she gave them nothing. The office emptied out, an hour earlier than she had. Not yet. But the story wasn't done. She waited until the video had reached critical mass, shared by a congresswoman, debated on a national talk show, pulled apart by legal analysts online, before agreeing to sit down for her first live interview. She didn't dress up for it. No makeup, no hair done. She wore Imani's varsity hoodie and sat in the hospital's family consultation room with tired eyes and a voice like a blade. They told me my daughter resisted, she said to the camera. What she resisted was dying. The interviewer didn't interrupt. They didn't need to. They thought no one would see. They thought silence was protection. But that silence is gone now. The clip aired that night. It ran on every major station, and with it came a ripple the department couldn't contain. The mayor, previously quiet, made a public statement the following morning, his voice trembling behind the podium. We are deeply troubled, he read, eyes never quite meeting the camera. We have initiated an external review. But Alice knew what that meant. A review was a stalling tactic, a distraction dressed as action. So she kept pushing. She and Rachel met again in secret, this time at a diner 40 minutes outside the city. The kind of place with peeling booths and bottomless coffee. No cameras. No suits. Rachel brought documents, leaked from the inside. Shift logs, officer histories, internal memos. She slid them across the table without a word. "They knew," she said. "Halpern has 4 excessive force complaints, none stuck, always lack of evidence. And Mackie? New, green, afraid of shadows. He followed Halpern like a dog." Alice flipped through the files, each one heavier than the last. "Amy, wasn't he pulled off the street?" she asked. Rachel shook her head. "They protect their own, that's the game. But the footage changes the rules." The chief's scrambling. He had no idea the video existed. They all thought it was buried. Alice nodded slowly. "It's not buried anymore." The next step came fast. With Rachel's help, Alice contacted the state attorney's office. They set up a preliminary meeting in a neutral building, away from the courthouse, 2 attorneys, 1 aide, and a legal investigator, all in suits, all serious. They played the video again, this time in silence, no commentary, no reaction. When it ended, the aide spoke first. "This is going to blow open," he said. The lead attorney leaned forward. "We're opening a formal investigation, independent. We'll subpoena every officer on shift that night, starting with Halpern and Mackie. If you're ready for that kind of firestorm, we'll move." "I'm ready," Alice said. But she wasn't. Because once the subpoenas hit, the fire came quickly. Halpern lawyered up and released a statement through his attorney. "My client followed department protocol. He regrets the outcome, but stands by his training." Mackie went silent. Word leaked that he was considering cooperation. The department doubled down, released their own footage, carefully edited, showing only the moments before the violence started. But it was too late. The unedited tape was out. Public opinion had shifted. The protests swelled. One night, as Alice left the hospital, she found a note under her windshield. "You're ruining lives. Think about your daughter." She read it twice. Then she folded it, tucked it in her bag, and didn't say a word. At home, the threats continued. Emails, calls, fake social media accounts. One even posed as Imani's classmate. But Alice had stopped being afraid. She moved like steel now. Every step a strike, every breath a refusal to be erased. Rachel called again, voice rushed. "Mackie flipped," she said. "He's turning state's witness. He's saying Halpern escalated, that he was scared, that Halpern told him to make it look like resistance." Alice closed her eyes. "That's it," Rachel said. "That's the break." Soon after, the state issued a warrant for Halpern's arrest. News stations parked outside the department as agents escorted him out in cuffs. The image went viral, Halpern, red-faced and sneering, covering his head with his coat, as protesters screamed at him from behind barricades. That night, Alice walked into Imani's room and found the nurse adjusting the monitors. She had some movement in her left hand, the nurse said gently. Might have been reflex, but it's the first in days. Alice approached the bed, her fingers trembling as she reached for her daughter's hand. "Imani," she whispered. "They arrested him, the man who did this to you. He's in a cell now." She swore. Just for a second, she felt a faint squeeze. Her breath hitched. She leaned in closer. "That's right, baby. You're coming back. You didn't fight alone." That weekend, Alice stood on the courthouse steps with a crowd stretching down the block. Tori stood beside her. So did Margaret. So did Rachel, in plain clothes, her badge tucked away. Alice stepped up to the microphone, the flash of cameras exploding like fireworks around her. "They told me to be quiet," she said. "They told me to stop asking questions, to let it go, to remember my place." A pause. She looked down at the faces watching her. "My place is wherever my daughter's justice lives. And we're just getting started." The crowd roared. Inside the courthouse, behind thick walls and polished floors, another storm was building. Civil suits, investigations, administrative leave, officers whispering, lawyers circling. Alice didn't care. The world had finally turned its head toward Brookridge Hills. The morning Imani opened her eyes, the sky outside the hospital window was a soft, forgiving gray. Not the stormy kind. Not the kind that warned of something coming. It was calm, like the world itself had finally taken a breath. Alice was half asleep in the chair beside the bed, blanket tucked under her chin, when the shift happened. A slow blink. 1, then 2. Imani's fingers twitched first, then her lips moved without sound. Alice stirred at the edge of her dreams. She heard the soft rattle of the monitor first, then the quiet rustle of movement beside her. When her eyes snapped open, her heart stopped. Imani's eyes were open, unfocused, dazed, but open. She was alive. Alice didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply reached for her daughter's hand, wrapped her fingers around it, and whispered, "You're safe." Imani's lips moved again, barely audible. "Mom," Alice smiled, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Yeah, baby. I'm here." The nurses came rushing in, pressing buttons and checking vitals, voices urgent but filled with awe. Alice stepped back only long enough to let them do their work, but her eyes never left her daughter. Word spread quickly. Rachel was the first to arrive, not in a suit but in jeans and a hoodie, her badge nowhere in sight. She stepped into the room, took one look at Imani and smiled so wide it made her eyes glisten. "She did it," she said. "No," Alice whispered. "We did." Imani's recovery wasn't quick. Her speech was slow at first, her memory patchy, and her body weak from the days in the coma. But every day she grew stronger. The swelling receded, the bruises faded, and with every breath she took, Alice felt a piece of herself coming back too. The trial for Officer Brent Halpern began 2 months later in a courtroom packed wall to wall with media, families, activists, and curious residents who had once avoided Alice in grocery store aisles. Now they looked at her with something closer to respect, some with guilt, others with awe. Mackey took the stand first. His voice shook as he testified. He admitted to following orders he didn't agree with, claimed Halpern told him to shut up, hold the girl down, and just do what needed to be done. He said she was just another one, that nobody would believe her anyway. When they played the full video in court, a heavy silence fell over the room. Even Halpern couldn't meet the screen's gaze. His lawyers squirmed. Jurors looked sick. Alice sat with her hands in her lap, Imani's locket wrapped tight around her fingers. Then came Margaret. Her testimony was clear, firm, and unwavering. She described what she saw without embellishment. "They hit her long after she stopped moving," she said. "It wasn't policing, it was punishment." When Alice finally took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. "My daughter had never been in trouble," she began. "She was a student, a volunteer, a child walking home with a backpack full of library books. But they saw her as a threat. They made her a suspect before they ever spoke to her." She paused, eyes sweeping the room. "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about recognition. It's about saying, 'You mattered.' And today, I want the court to say that my daughter mattered." Halpern was found guilty of felony assault under color of law. The courtroom broke into quiet gasps when the verdict was read. He stared forward, jaw tight, as the judge denied bail and ordered immediate remand. Outside, reporters gathered like birds. Alice stepped to the microphones again, but this time she didn't speak about pain. She spoke about power. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's the beginning of something better. Something that says this town is not afraid to confront its own reflection." The police chief resigned the following week. A new interim chief was appointed, Detective Rachel Barnes. The announcement was made at a town hall packed beyond capacity. When Rachel took the mic, she didn't speak long. "This badge should mean accountability, not fear," she said. "From this day forward, Brookridge Hills will be a department of transparency. No more cover-ups. No more silence. It was the first time in years anyone had stood and clapped at a town hall meeting. Back at home, life moved in slow, healing circles. Alice returned to work part-time at St. Eileen's. Darlene had kept her spot open, and every nurse on the floor welcomed her back with warm, tired smiles. Even Keith offered a quiet apology in the form of a fresh uniform and coffee that wasn't bitter. Imani went back to school in the spring. She wore sunglasses the first week, unsure of how her classmates would look at her. But the first thing she saw when she stepped into the gym was a banner that read, "Welcome back, Imani." Underneath it were the faces of her teammates, her teachers, even the principal who, for the first time, looked her in the eye and didn't look away. She got a standing ovation at the student assembly, not because she was a victim, but because she came back, because she had survived something meant to break her, and now she stood stronger. Alice watched it all from the back row, her heart full, her spine straight. Her daughter, once broken on a sidewalk in the name of protocol, was now a living reminder that change wasn't just possible, it was happening. That summer, Alice started a non-profit in Imani's name, Clear Eyes Project, dedicated to training civilians to document and report police encounters safely. Margaret helped launch the outreach program. Rachel partnered with Alice to include it in department trainings. Even Tori joined the board as a media liaison. The first event drew over 200 people from neighboring cities. Some had been hurt. Some had lost someone. Others just wanted to be part of something honest. Alice stood at the front of the community center, Imani beside her, and looked out at the faces. "Thank you for being here," she said, voice strong but warm. "What happened to my daughter didn't start with one bad officer, and it won't end with one conviction. But together we can make sure the next child walking home isn't mistaken for a threat." That night, mother and daughter sat on the porch, a warm breeze carrying laughter down the block from a neighbor's barbecue. Imani leaned her head on Alice's shoulder. "Did you ever think we'd be okay again?" Alice didn't answer right away. She stared out at the sky, at the stars blinking quietly above them. "We're not just okay," she said finally. "We're better."